Again, we'd like to welcome you to this first session in the First Line Leader webinar series, Commitment to My Coworkers, Why Can't We All Just Play Nice? We're so glad you could join us. Today's presenter will be Donna Wright. Donna is a professional development specialist with Creative Healthcare Management in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She has worked with many healthcare organizations around the world. She's the author of the books The Ultimate Guide to Competency Assessment in Healthcare, Competency Assessment Field Guide, and a contributor to the national award-winning book Relationship-Based Care, A Model for Transforming Practice. Donna has worked in both staff and leadership roles. Her experiences have taken her to a variety of healthcare settings, including rural Africa. Donna is a member and past president of the Association for Nursing Professional Development and recipient of their Promoting Excellence and Consultation Award. Welcome to the program, Donna. Take it away.
Thank you, Chris. I'm happy to be here, and I have to tell you, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. Today we're going to talk about commitment to my coworker. Why can't we all just play nice together? And I think this is one of those things that intrigues me. Almost every team I've been on, every team I've observed, I hear people say, why can't we all just play nice? Why can't we all get along? What happens sometimes when human beings come together and try to work together? There can be some natural irritations and other things that start to arise that make collaborative work very difficult. So one of my favorite topics is how can we do that? How can we commit to each other as coworkers and really come together to play nice for eventually the outcome for our patients, which is what we all want. One of the things that I realize in looking at this topic of commitment to my coworker and why we can't all play nice together is that there are some people on our team who can really, I guess, bring us down. We find situations where people in our team are burnt out or tired or they're disengaged or they were never engaged to begin with. I have a label for these people. I actually call these people OJRs. OJR stands for on-the-job retired people. Now this has nothing to do with retirement. This has to do with an attitude that someone has. You can be 60 years old, 20 years old, 40 years old, it doesn't matter. There can be OJRs on every team, and there usually are, one or two on every team. The OJR tends to not engage very well. They don't do their job. They can be very much a burden and a weight on the whole team. And the reason I bring them up is not so much that they don't do their share of the work. I want to lift up this concept because it seems like the OJR, I don't know how they do it, but it seems like they have the ability to suck the life out of the rest of the team. And they can do that in the first 10 minutes of the day. They come to work, and in the first 5 minutes of the day, they start complaining about things. They start to make this noise. They start to go, and start to whine about things. Within the first 10 minutes of the day together, pretty soon we're all kind of making the same whining noise. And so I realized the power that this negative group of people can have. It can be a small group of people. I found that sometimes it's only 1 or 2 people on a team, only 1 or 2% of your team may be like this, but they have a huge impact on the team itself. And so I really want to lift this up and talk about this reality. And I will say this, if you don't have an OJR on your team, if you don't have 1 or 2 on your team, let us know. We move them around, so we'll get you some. Everybody seems to have one or the other somewhere. So anyway, there always seems to be that negativity, and we need to be prepared for it, I guess. One of the things that we also do that gets in our way is that sometimes we will say in those situations where we have people with negative energy, we say, well, they should know better. I shouldn't have to tell them that. They should be able to. I shouldn't have to. They should do this. I shouldn't have to do that. If you hear yourself saying should that much, you're shoulding all over yourself. We've got to make sure that we are clarifying things. We are setting up a healthy work environment and not hoping and shoulding that we can get to that point. So that's a key component that I want to make sure that we think about as we look at that word when it pops up. Now let's take a look at the nature of teams. Let's just dive into what teams look like to begin with. teams have some similar characteristics. No matter where you're at, what kind of group you're a part of, you can pretty much divide things up into some categories. I really believe on every team I've ever worked on or watched, about 10% of the team are always those positive people. 10% of your team are those happy, perky people who are energized, and these are the people who come to work and they're happy and perky all the time. They usually say, "Oh, look, isn't it a beautiful sunshiny day? Isn't it great?" And then maybe we look around and we say, "Well, it's not really that sunny today. It's kind of gray and rainy." And these people say, "But isn't it a fresh rain? We just needed it so much." And so no matter what it is, whether it's sunny or rainy, they see the positive stuff in everything. So 10%, bless their little heart, 10% of our team will always be these positive, happy, perky people, and we love them. Then I'll also say that 10% of our team is going to be negative people. 10% of our team tends to be kind of the OJR group, you know. They come to work every day and they're always kind of miserable about things. These are the people who come to work and say, "Oh, guess what happened to me last night?" And then we respond by saying, I don't want to know. We don't want to get sucked into their negative energy, but they say, "I'm going to tell you anyway," and they start to tell you all their miseries and everything bad that's happening in their life. So 10% of our team tends to sit in this constant mud puddle of misery all the time. And then I say the 80% of us that are in the middle, the 80% of the team that's in the middle tends to go whichever direction that the wind blows the strongest that day. So if the positive people are talking about stuff, we tend to be upbeat more as a team. If the negative people start to whine, we tend to gravitate into that negative direction. And so we can be very vulnerable to that. And I think we need to pay attention to the reality of this formula. For the longest time, people have said to me, "You know, we need to get rid of the negative people. We just need to get rid of them." And I said, "Okay, I understand that, but I also will say, too, I've gotten rid of negative people. I've actually even terminated people because their attitude was just so negative with the team, and I've gotten rid of them. And guess what? Boop, another negative person popped up. So it always seems to be that there's somebody that has some kind of negative thing to say. Even I have to say there's times when there's a touch of OJR in me. I'm not saying I live in that land, but there's times when I'm not at my best and I'm not always positive. So I think my point is I think we've got to be prepared that we're always going to have negativity in our groups. It doesn't mean we have to accept it. We just need to be prepared for it. We need to be prepared for negativity. So I really believe rather than focusing on the 10%, and hoping we can either get them to be aware of how negative they are or change, also want to change. You could wait all day for that to happen. I want to help the 80% in the middle how to master the wind, how to blow the wind in a positive direction, how to help set the tone of the team so we're working on this together. So those are some things I've now understood about the nature of team, is there will always be positive energy, there'll always be negative energy. We just need to be masterful in how we move through our daily interactions. So let's take a look at that then. What are some of the key elements of playing nice together? And I believe one of the key things about really playing nice together is clarifying our expectations. If we do not have our expectations clear, they will be made up. Expectations are never left empty or open. No, they're always filled in somewhere. The thing that really worries me, or that I've seen over time, is that in the absence of us not articulating our expectations or the rules about how we'll engage with each other, in the absence of that, the OJR is most likely to fill in the rules for group functioning. So our negative person ends up creating, in an informal way, some of the rules on how we're going to function. So let me give you an example. I remember when I was about 8 or 9 years old, the neighbor kid across the street, he came over to my house to teach me how to play Monopoly. He was 12 years old, and he was going to show me how to play the game of Monopoly. And if you think about the game of Monopoly, for an 8 or 9-year-old, that's a pretty sophisticated game to play at that age. But he was going to show me how to do this. So we set up the board, and I think I was the dog and he was the hat, or I don't know, whatever. But we started to play the game, and we were shaking the dice, and we were going around the board and doing all this stuff. As we went around the board, the first time he passed go, he collected $200. And then shortly after that, I rolled the dice, and I went past go. So I said, now, do I get $200 also? And he said, oh, no, the second person to pass go has to give $200 back to the bank. Okay, I didn't know, so I gave $200 back to the bank. Then we were rolling the dice and playing the game some more, and he passed go again. So he was, again, around the board, and he would have been the third person to pass go. And I said, now what happens? You're the third person to pass go. He said, oh, I collect $200 again. Okay, then I passed go as the fourth person to do that. And I said, now what happens? And he said, well, now you have to give $200 to the person to your right, which was him. By the time we got to that point, I said, this game is stupid. I don't want to play your stupid game. And I kind of threw things up, and we quit playing. I look at that situation, and I felt betrayed, like I didn't know what the rules were. He was making it up as he went along and to his advantage. I felt very manipulated in that situation. But if at the beginning, before we even started to play the game, he would have told me, the first person who passes go gets $200. The second person has to give $200 to the bank. The third person gets $200, and the fourth person has to give $200 to the person to their right. If he would have told me that all at the beginning, that those were the rules, I would have written it off as it was just my unlucky day. But because the rules were not articulated ahead of time, I really felt taken advantage of. I felt disconnected from what was going on. So my point is, you must talk about your expectations. You must clarify them. If you do not clarify them as a group, somebody or some small group within your team will do that, and it might be the most negative people on the team. They will create what the informal, behind-the-scenes kind of group function rules are going to be. So it's important that we look at this. So let's take a look at how do we articulate our expectations. We as leaders must be clear about our expectations, and we must do that in 3 different directions. We need to articulate our expectations in 3 different directions. We need to articulate that to people whom you report to, your boss. You need to be clear about what you want from them and what they want from you. So articulation of expectations has to go up to our boss. It also has to go across to our peers, other leaders, other managers, looking at different things that we are doing there. We need to make sure that whoever's in our peer group, that we have an understanding of how we're going to support each other, what we're going to do in our actions with each other. We need to articulate our expectations. And then we need to articulate our expectations for the people that report to us, that we support, the people whom we support. And so we need to make sure that that is clear too, us being their leader, supporting that group of people. What do we expect of those people? So we're going to look at that in a lot of different ways. But articulation of expectations does not just go down the ladder or across to our peers. There's really all 3 directions. So we end up being part of many different groups within the organization. And your articulated expectation has to be done in each of these teams and groups that we are a part of. As we look at the articulation of expectation, we want to make sure that we are doing the articulation of expectation clearly. This can be done on a one-to-one basis. You and I can say, as you interact with each other, what do I expect of you and what do you expect of me? We can certainly do that on a one-to-one basis. I would encourage you to have those kinds of conversations with team members or coworkers. It could even be, it can be very, very formal, or it can be informal. I've seen beautiful examples of teams in the operating room, coming together and saying, as we do this procedure together, what do we expect from each other? We might not even know each other, but we're doing a one-on-one kind of check-in with each other as we do something. Or would you watch my patients or my area or this work while I'm gone, whether it be just today for this moment or while I go on vacation. And a one-on-one articulation of expectation can be done there as well too. The concept of commitment to my coworker really takes it to another level. When we look at the commitment to my coworker concept, we're going to really take it to a proactive group level place. We're going to create a healthy environment for not only our actions right here in the moment, but for future actions and interactions as we're working together. So we're really setting the tone of what do we expect from the team. And that needs to be done in a very proactive way. And we come together as a group and discuss it as a group. So we're going to articulate our expectations as a whole team and negotiate some of those things together. Now, what makes this important, that we look at it in this kind of group way, is that it becomes extremely difficult to follow up with somebody when they cross the line if we have not discussed ahead of time what that line looks like. So if we're trying to follow up with somebody who's crossed the line, you can't do that if you haven't discussed what that line looks like before you even get started. If we end up doing that, we're back to the should thing. Well, you should know that that's rude, or you should know that that's not acceptable. Well, I view the world in a different way, and we didn't really talk about that. When you said it was supposed to be confidential, I didn't know that you mean I couldn't discuss it with this group over here. I thought you meant just with that group. Those are the kinds of things that we need to be clear about. So whether you're doing that on a one-to-one basis or we're doing it at a group level, we need to make sure that the articulation of our expectations is clear, which requires some courage, some insight on self, some insight on vision and objectives and other things like that. It helps us all align. So most of this that we're talking about today with commitment to my coworker is a way for us to align to our eventual outcomes and shared mission statement and values that we have together as a team. Now, the interesting part, and this is the part that I love about articulating our expectations and our commitment to our coworkers, is that things can go bad. Environments can go bad in both obvious and subtle ways. So let's take a look at that as well too. One of the things that we talk about frequently now in the last decade in healthcare especially is the concept of bullying. You can hear also in the school grounds and teenagers and elementary schools talking about this as well. This has been a concept that has been really lifted up in our society, and we talk about bullying, which is that obvious, overt kind of crossing the line things that happen. And it's interesting in some of the research around bullying, how people will reference that 10-80-10 rule I told you earlier, is that people start to bully. There's that 10% of the negative kind of group that starts to bully. We all know it. We can all identify it. But the 80% of us in the middle don't always know how to respond. We don't always know what to do. We said, I knew it. I saw bullying. I could put my finger on it. But gosh, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to bring up. I didn't know how to stop it. And so the 80% of us in the middle often become silent and guilt-ridden and ineffective, and it adds to the team. And then the bullying or the negative behavior ends up taking lead and becomes the leadership really for the team. And that's when even a formal leader starts to lose control in that situation, because the negative energy starts to become the leadership energy. So that's one area. That's very obvious. That's very overt. But another way that we start to see environments go bad is with insidious behavior. I have a reference in the back here by Zimmerman and Amore from 2011 that really bring up this concept of insidious behavior, which is really defined as proceeding in a gradual, subtle way, but with harmful effects. So it could be repeat of killer statements or killer phrases within a meeting. Things like, oh, that'll never work, or we tried that 3 years ago. It didn't work then, it's not going to work now. Or they'll never let us do it. You know they won't. And then you say, well, who are they? Oh, well, we don't know who they are, but they won't let us. You know, so there are these things that aren't quite bullying. You can't quite label as that extreme or overt kind of negativity, but it's this subtle kind of underlying, kind of hovers there all the time. And this has been defined as an insidious behavior, and over time can really wear on a team. So we need to be aware of this, because this starts to set a tone. It's not so strong that you feel you need to stand up and have the courage to stop right there kind of statements, as you might do within bullying, but it does have a huge impact on what our teams do and how effective they become together. So I lift up this idea that insidious behavior can be a very powerful thing. It's that subtle behavior that creeps in to our interactions. So let's take a look then about how can we create this environment of commitment to my coworkers so that we can have environments of success. How can we really pull our teams together and make successful teams? I want to introduce you to a commitment card and their statements that Marie Manthe created back in the early 70s, started to think about this, and I just fell in love with it. So I'm going to show you some of the statements on this commitment card. You don't have to necessarily use this as it is. You can do whatever you want with these statements, or maybe it'll stimulate some of your own. But this is a good starting point to help you articulate what you want from your team. So you come together and you talk about some of these statements that would be guiding principles or rules of engagement or guidelines for us to interact with each other as a team. So I'm going to walk you through each of these statements and give you some idea of what they each look like and sound like, and then we'll talk about how you actually implement this and roll it out with your team. So here are the statements. It starts, the little pocket card starts out with, as your coworker with a shared goal of excellent patient care, I commit to the following. I will accept responsibility for establishing and maintaining healthy interpersonal relationships with you and every member of this team. I will talk with you promptly if I have a problem with you. The only time I will discuss it with another person is when I need advice or help in deciding how to communicate with you appropriately. I will establish and maintain a relationship of functional trust with you and every member of this team. My relationship with each of you will be equally respectful, regardless of job title, levels of educational preparation, or any other difference that may occur or may exist. I will not engage in the 3 B's, bickering, backbiting, and blaming, and I ask you not to as well. I will practice the 3 C's, caring, commitment, and collaboration in my relationships with you, and ask you to do the same with me. I will not complain about another team member, and I ask you not to as well. If I hear you doing so, I will ask you to talk to that person. I will accept you as you are today, forgiving past problems, and ask you to do the same with me. I will commit to finding solutions to problems rather than complaining about them or blaming someone for them, and I ask you to do the same with me. I will affirm your contribution to the quality of our work. I will remember that neither of us is perfect and that human errors are opportunities, not for shame or guilt, but for forgiveness and growth. I love those statements. Every time I read them, I just love their depth and how foundationally they are based in what our teams need over time. So now I say this little commitment to my coworker card, which can be in a little pocket card. I'm going to talk about how we can look at this and how we can use it. You can either use this card as is, or you can look at these statements and say, this can motivate you and inspire you to create your own statements, or you can look at it and say which one of these we'd like to have for our team. You don't have to use each of these. This is a starting point that will give you some idea how to get started with this process and how to think about some articulated expectations around clarifying interpersonal expectations. We're very good at defining procedures, policies around procedures or technical skills, even some things around critical thinking and problem solving stuff. We're not that good at it, but we've got a few things going with that. But when it comes to that interpersonal stuff or team interactions, we kind of just hope everybody will be nice enough. And that is where we make our mistake. We need to articulate and clarify our expectations with each other. So when you look at commitment to my coworker, how do you then do this? Well, please, please do not take this commitment card or any other sheet that you create and just mail it out to people or stick it in their lockers or pass it out at a meeting and say, on Monday we're going to start this. That is the worst way to do this. You do not dictate it out to people. You do not say, this is what we're going to do. It has to be mutually agreed upon, and we have to do it in a collaborative way. So what I would encourage you to do is sit with your team, however you define your team, and this can happen in multiple ways. You could sit with your peers, or you could sit with the people that you supervise, your shift, your clinic, the operating room suite team for the day, wherever it is that you have created your team. And we need to sit down and do a couple things. We need to gather together and look at this in a way that we can collaboratively develop the statements. We need to look at those statements that work for us and really have a collaborative discussion. You can start with the statements I just read. You can use the commitment card and go through it and say, what do you think of this? Everybody, let's take a look at this. What do you think about it? And people might say, well, I like them except for number 4. Okay, fine, then take 4 off. It doesn't matter. The point is that you come together and you decide collaboratively what you want to do, what feels comfortable. You can maybe even add some things. Maybe you've had some history in the past where something has come up and you say, we want to add that as one of our foundational statements that will help us to all move in the same direction. But you do that in a collaborative way. Not the boss giving it to people, but the team themselves with the boss, all doing it together with the leader, all coming together to collaborate in that discussion. Then we need to negotiate and agree upon it. This is not something you vote on. You don't say, okay, all in favor, say aye. That's not how you go about this. Even if one person feels uncomfortable in that situation, I bring it up. I say we want to honor every person's voice. I'll give you an example. I was at a meeting one time where we were talking about what should be our articulated expectations or our commitment to our coworker statements for this meeting. And someone says, we're going to really talk about some sensitive things. And so somebody brought up, well, I think one of the commitment statements should be, what's said here stays here. And everybody, they all nodded their head. They all nodded their head. And we were kind of sliding into this agreement that I thought was pretty simple or obvious. But then I got to thinking, wait a minute, I'm not sure I want everything to stay here. Is everything truly confidential? If we've got a problem, don't we want to take this out and actually apply it? So I said, wait a minute, I don't feel comfortable to say I agree with that statement as everything said here stays here. Can we look at it a little bit deeper to say, I want us to go out there and use some of this. I want us to talk it out enough or learn from each other and then take the principles out. Yes, I'm not saying you have to go out there and say, so-and-so told me about this problem with this person. No, that's not what I'm saying. But we negotiated and then eventually agreed upon what would everybody feel comfortable with of taking out the sterilized points without the specific details. That ended up being our commitment statement to each other, that we were going to leave this meeting with some action and some words and some even maybe description about the problem. But we weren't going to share any specific details that would put somebody in an uncomfortable place. So it took some discussion about that, and it wasn't right away. We probably would have said yes to that right away, but it wasn't. It's not always that clear. So I really say take that step to really negotiate and agree upon things, and then it needs to be periodically reviewed. You don't just put it out there and say, okay, for the next decade now, we need to do it this way. I definitely say every time a team member leaves or is added to the team, you really need to review again. Sometimes at every meeting I've reviewed it, or once a year, or some other things like that too. So you need to have some kind of periodic review to make sure we're still all on track and to look at where we need to go with some of these ideas. Okay, so again, when you're putting together your commitment statements, they should be collaboratively identified or collaboratively developed. And whatever those are, just whatever you can agree upon is important. So then we negotiate and we agree upon it, and we look at it and say, can we all live with this? Is there anybody in the room or the group who can't live with it, because we want to tweak it to meet your needs? And then we can ask the group again, how do they feel? And then we need to come back periodically and say, how do we feel about this? Where are we at with this? Does it still meet our needs as a team or a group? These are essential. These are the steps in good articulation of what those commitment statements will be. So now, when do we articulate our team expectations? You could do this at the beginning of a shift. You could do it at the beginning of a day in the clinic. You could do it at the beginning of a procedure in the operating room. You could do it at the start of a meeting, for example. If we all get together and we're starting a meeting, we're coming together, a meeting that maybe meets every month, or one that's just a one-time thing. It even could be a meeting that we have informally in the hallway with 2 or 3 people. Oh, good. I want to talk about this, and can we agree upon that we're going to keep this whatever confidential, da-da-da. We could even have it brief like that. Other times that we would articulate our expectations might be annually at a council meeting or a leadership retreat or something like that. I've even had some groups, some leaders, as they supported each other after work, and they said, can I just kind of talk about some of the problems I'm having, and we're going to just keep the conversation here, as they debriefed and shared some different things. So this can be very formal gatherings or very informal gatherings, but the articulation of the expectations needs to be there. It needs to be clear. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can do this and apply it. Again, up the ladder, across the board to our peers, and down to people that we supervise as we look at the traditional organizational chart. But it's everywhere where people are gathered together. And I really believe that the commitment to my coworker concepts are about creating a culture of caring and respect for everyone on the team. Really, that caring and respect for everyone on the team. Whether the team exists all the time, every day that we see each other regularly, or we're a team that exists just for 5 minutes. The code team, the response group over here, the committee that follows up on a Sentinel event, whatever it might be, we need to make sure that we're creating a culture where people feel seen, they feel heard, and they know how they're entering into it so that they can understand what respect looks like and what caring looks like on the team. Those are the concepts of commitment to my coworker. Here are some references that I would really lift up for you to take a look at around the commitment to my coworkers concept. You can see some of the references in other books that I would suggest you read on this topic, because I found it to be very fascinating. A commitment to my coworker concept is something that applies to every facet of work and life on the planet. And the more we understand about it, the better off we will be. So I'm going to pause here and turn it back over to Chris and ask, Chris, have you had any questions or comments that have come in so far that I might be able to answer at this time?
Well, hi, Donna. Thanks so much. Great presentation so far. We did have a few questions, and some more, I believe, are coming in. So the first question here is, I have a person who is constantly making negative comments during meetings. How can I deal with him?
Okay, that's a good one. And whether or not you're the leader or a coworker, I would always ask the question, if this is a repeat kind of thing, my first step usually is to find a private way to have a discussion with that person rather than public. So you really would want to say, you know, go to that person and say, each time you bring this up, I'm feeling like you're kind of putting down an idea and not allowing it to be there, or just voice your concern and your thought and see where it goes at that point. Sometimes doing that privately, you uncover that, well, but I thought we were supposed to question different things, or I thought we were. Then you start to understand maybe we're on two different places. And can we get to a point where we're showing more respect for each other and allowing everyone's ideas to come out rather than shutting things down? And we can have some of that dialogue. So I would say my first instinct would be to do it in a private way. Now I also say there's sometimes too I've gone with a public thing as well too, but that's after the private thing. I've had some situations where a colleague continued to make comments that were not the healthiest. I'm just going to say it that way. But they said they weren't aware of it. They said, I just don't notice when I'm doing it. And I said, can I help and support you by mentioning a phrase or word that might help you realize, you know, you're doing it again? And that worked out really well. It was very respectful to first have a private conversation. And then when that person, we were in the meeting again and they kind of started to drift in that bad negative direction, I would just kind of say that word, and nobody else in the room knew anything about it, but I just kind of weaved that word into my next sentence, and it was agreed upon between both of us. And then that person kind of looked at me like, you know, okay, I see what I did there, or it was just very mutually respectful. So I would say first start privately, see where you can go with that, and then look at different ways you can support that person. There may be some people who just don't want to have anything to do with any of these kind of conversations, and that's where we need to involve their supervisor if you're not that person, or start to look at some disciplinary action and coaching kinds of things, more formal. But that's where I would start with that particular situation, Chris.
Great. Thanks, Donna. Next question is there some education to help people apply these commitments?
Yeah, I would say it's very formal education, usually done in a group by the group themselves to look at that. However, some of the slides that I gave you of the steps to look at development and negotiation, agreeing and reviewing are very much a part of that. But what I love is that you can really start to show how you can evolve this within your group. I can tell you another little story. I had a situation where we taught this formally in some classes, kind of like this, but in the hospital that I was working at. And one day in the halls, we've been doing this for a while. One day in the hall, I ran into one of the staff nurses, and I happened to be at a director level position, and I wasn't her director, but part of another group. And we were talking about a meeting that we were both a part of. We were part of the documentation committee, and I was the one to take the minutes and record some of the questions. And she said, Don, I haven't seen those minutes come out yet, and it's been 3 weeks. Where are they? And I said, oh, yeah, you know what? I had to send it down to the secretarial pool to have it typed in and filed away, and I haven't gotten it back yet. And you know who I have to give it to? Michelle. And you know how Michelle is. And I started to complain about Michelle, and she's not good at her job. She never gets back to you. I've left her like 3 or 4 voice messages. And the most beautiful thing that I love is that staff nurse looked at me and she said, you know, Don, I need to ask a question. Have you had the opportunity to talk with Michelle directly about this problem? And there was this long period of silence, and I went, oh my gosh, no, not really. And she said, well, then I would be happy to sit with you for a moment and talk about this if it leads you to go talk with Michelle directly. But if you don't have the courage to go talk with Michelle directly, then I need to stop the conversation right here and I cannot participate. Because that then is gossip versus supporting a coworker to have a healthy relationship. Oh my gosh, I have to tell you, even though we did classes on all of this stuff around commitment to my coworker, that interaction in the hallway was the most wonderful, informal education. I loved it, and it was us holding each other accountable in a loving, caring, respectful way. She didn't make me feel bad, but she was clear. It was clear that either you're going to go talk with Michelle and I will support you, or you need to stop this conversation and I will not participate in it. It was the most beautiful thing. So I always say when it comes to education, don't assume it's a formal thing. It could be classes and things like that, or workshops and modules, whatever. But it can also be these informal interactions every day as we talk to each other about this.
Great, thanks, Donna. Next question is, I have a repeated issue with my boss. She seems to dismiss my ideas. I'm not sure how to get her attention.
Okay, oh, that's a fun one. Well, there is that, try your best to, really be clear, I need to talk with you. And if you have, it sounds like you already have done that. So then I would say the next step, I would say, if you have tried repeatedly to do that and you just can't get this person's attention, and ask yourself, have you been really clear about that, asking for their time, or just subtle? Because are you expecting them to pick up on the right cues, then that's not healthy either. But if you've been really, really clear, I need your time, I really need you to listen to this, try to use some of those kinds of words. If they still will not listen to you, this is one of the strategies that I've used that has worked good, but you have to be very careful about how you go about it. I have used a situation where I have gone around my boss up to their boss, and for this reason, I want you to hear very clearly what I'm doing here. I have gone up the ladder to the next level to say to the boss's boss, I'm having trouble talking with this person, and I believe you have a very close relationship with them, and you could advise me on how to do this. You have to be very clear that you are not there to tell on them or say, I want you to fix my problem for me. None of that. You need to be very clear about this. You need to own it. But you can go to that person above the ladder and say, help me, advise me, be my mentor in how to do this. And two things will happen. You will get some hopefully wonderful mentoring support from that person and some insight that maybe you didn't have before to help you understand that in a better way. And you lift up and include that second level tier in the problem itself so that they've got some awareness of it. But again, I say repeatedly, I am not asking you to fix my problem. I am not asking you to do anything for me. I am asking you to be my mentor only. And I've even said, can I count on you for that? I'm not asking you to do anything more, but I need your help and advice. And when I've needed to do that, it has worked very well. So, but you have to be really, really clear. Do not just stumble into that accidentally, and do not do that as a first effort. But when you hit the wall and you can't go any further, that's not a bad strategy.
Okay, great. Next question is, we have a lot more than just 2 OJRs in our team. What do we do about them?
Oh, I love that one. I get that. I hear that in so many groups. They said, we got a lot more than 2. Well, here's what I will say. I really don't believe you do, because there aren't that many, but here's what happens. Over time, when you have 1 or 2 OJRs who are really prominent and have learned how to manipulate things and really introduce and interject negativity, the 80% in the middle seem to constantly be in that negative zone. They gravitate there. That's a point of survival. I look at Maslow's hierarchy, that some groups, that's the only way you can survive is befriending the bullies, so that they don't torment you as well. So you kind of end up joining that team in a way. But when really pushed in a different direction, or when that negativity is dealt with in a healthy way or even removed, those 80% drift back pretty easily. So I would say you might just have a very strong group, or maybe even a weak response from the 80%, that your 80% are just not skilled enough. They don't have the competencies on how to blow the wind in a different direction. So I would focus on really building up the skill of the 80% so they don't get sucked in. And I would also look at really doing some maybe formal action with the people who are really the super negatives, and trying to put an end to that in a more coaching, counseling way as a supervisor. So I would say you'd be surprised that when you start to do some of those actions, it changes and it doesn't feel like it's such a large group. But I hear you. I get that question a lot.
That's great, Donna. Thanks. Last question here is a bit longer, excuse me. What are some tips on being able to have your concerns and messages be understood and heard by senior and executive level leaders? And is there a disconnect between clinical and non-clinical leaders?
Boy, that's a full question, so we could look at this in a lot of different ways. I really don't, I'll start with the second half of that. I haven't really seen any difference in this from clinical and non-clinical groups. The commitment to my coworker thing pretty much works the same either way, and I think it's just the clarity of it and linking it back. I saw a beautiful example the other day of a group of people in parking services at a healthcare organization. Large facility, large campus parking services, and they really looked at their articulated expectation, and they started off with a shared vision of our customers and the patient, and they said really in their articulated expectations, they wrote their own articulated expectation that says, we are the first people and the last people to greet the public as they enter into this environment. When they come onto the campus, we are the first people they see and the last people that they see as they drive away in their cars from our parking garage. And that's how they started their commitment card. I thought it was so beautiful. Then everything from there said how we treat each other, how we treat the patient. It's grounded in all of that. I thought it was the most beautiful way to kind of start their thinking process versus just, we're here together to park cars and be in our toll booths, and I don't know. It was just so nice for them to do it that way. So don't assume that there's a difference between clinical or non-clinical. Up and down the ladder, it gets tricky. I will say the thing that I find as we try to do the articulation of expectations is I've found as you go up the ladder further, especially at the executive level, they think that this takes a lot of time. And, well, we don't have time for that, or let's just get to this, or let's just get to that. I try very hard to slow it down and just say, even for this meeting, let's just, what's our expectation of each other just right now in the next 15 minutes? Not for articulating the expectation, but even if we're just meeting for 15 minutes, let's just state two things that we all want to agree with on how we're going to work together in the next 15 minutes. So it's, I try very hard to slow it down and do it and bring it up because we get so busy. And when we avoid it, when we don't do it, we slide right back into those negative places. So I would say as you're working with different level groups, if you can just bring it down to a slower place and play with it just a little bit, or even say at our last meeting, here's some of our expectations, can we just pull it out? I used to keep a little laminated card for some meetings that we just put out on the table and pass it around as we kind of started our meeting and say, does anybody want to change any of these, or do we all agree this is how we're going to start the meeting? It was good. I remember at one situation, one of the executives said, well, wait a minute, we're going to be talking about some merger information, so we have to be very sensitive to what leaves this room. Okay, good. That's the kind of articulation of expectations we need to have with each other. So I don't know, Chris, did I capture that one or did I miss some part of that? Because it was a fuller question.
Donna, I think that's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for letting me be here today.
Well, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you found this presentation of value. Hope everybody has a great rest of your week.